7:02. I see on the clock. I think we'll get started. You're in the control room of Expedia Cruises webinar this evening. Good evening, and thank you for joining Expedia Cruises as we travel around the world in 22 days. I know many of you have joined us for the first two of the series, so thank you for joining us here again tonight as we travel to Antarctica. So far, we've been to England and Ireland. We've been, or it was Scotland and Ireland, may have been England too. I'm so confused. There have been so many places. I hope you're joining us for all these and taking notes at the same time. We've also been to the Galapagos and South America. Let's cover a few ground rules before we get started. If you want to ask a question, there's a chat feature included in the program. Please ask your question to us. Kara will do her best to answer your questions during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. And of course, your consultant is always available to help you as well too. So let me take a moment to introduce Kara. Kara lives right here in Toronto, and she's worked for Quark Expeditions for 12 years. She has experienced many expeditions with Quark, including voyages to Antarctica, Greenland, Norway, and even Franz Josef Land. If you're like me, I had to look that one up. Franz Josef Land is a Russian archipelago in the Arctic Ocean, of all places. In fact, she's such an adventurer, she got engaged under the midnight sun at the North Pole on the bow of the most powerful icebreaker in the world, the 50 Years of Victory. Hopefully that's a good omen for 50 years of happy marriage.
Aww.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Kara. We're so happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It means so much. And when you are booking with Expedia Cruises, you are with such great hands for advisors, and they can constantly be in touch with people like me who have been in the business for almost 12 years. So I am Kara Matthew, and I'm delighted to be with all of you this evening. And I do have polar fever. I did go to the polar regions for the first time in 2010, and I went to the Arctic, to the North Pole, and I got hooked on traveling to the Arctic and Antarctica ever since. So I'm just delighted to be with you here tonight. And if you haven't heard of Quark Expeditions, that's okay. Quark Expeditions only does polar travel. We go to the Arctic and Antarctica. We don't go anywhere else in the world, and we've been in business for nearly 30 years. And I know with this great Around the World in 22 Days series, you were talking about Galapagos earlier, and it's those types of enthusiasts that are wildlife enthusiasts that come to the polar regions with Quark Expeditions. And we were the first company to go to the North Pole in 1991, which is still a trip we do today. And we were also the first company to fully circumnavigate Antarctica with passengers as well, just to give you a little bit of background. So when you are traveling with Quark Expeditions, we are specialists in these regions. We are uncompromisingly polar. And just before we get into little fun facts of these beautiful areas of Antarctica, who travels to the polar regions? Because you might find yourself in one of these types of travelers that comes with us to Quark Expeditions to the ends of the earth. So we do have those checklist travelers that want to checklist Antarctica off their list. My aunt traveled with me to Antarctica when I went for the first time, my 66-year-old aunt at the time, and she wanted to checklist Antarctica off her list and to see those penguins. But also learners come and travel with us because there's such a great educational component. We have glaciologists, geologists, biologists. We even have a penguinologist that comes with us to Antarctica. And also escapists, people who want to get away from it all and go really remote places of the earth and get away from a lot of people and get in the heart of nature, and also those adventurers. I think being on a small ship in these really remote locations is adventurous enough, but we also have lots of activities, which I'll share with you later on, because I even loved paddling in Antarctica. But we'll go down to the bottom of the world. So I will take you down to the very bottom of the world. We'll talk about Antarctic. the peninsula, but also the subantarctic regions, the Falkland Islands and South Georgia, which I'm excited to share with you some really neat pictures. But I love maps, so I will share with you some maps throughout our time together this evening, because I love the peninsula. It's the finger of land sticking up between Antarctica, the continent, and South America. And then those other subantarctic regions, South Georgia and the Falkland Islands, are still considered subantarctic areas. So I wanted to share with you the fact that I crossed the Drake Passage, the body of water between South America and Antarctica. But some people, they want to go to Antarctica, but they can fly with us to Antarctica and then get on the ship in Antarctica and have a full Antarctic Peninsula experience and fly back to South America. So a lot of travelers go from Ushuaia, Argentina, or Punta Arenas, Chile, so the southern tip of South America. So I hit 2 continents with my first Antarctic trip because I was able to explore a bit of South America for the first time before I traveled down to Antarctica. But I love Antarctica, and I wanted to share with you a bit of navigating this amazing continent, because Antarctica is the Earth's southernmost continent. It does include the geographic South Pole, and this continent is situated in the Antarctic region in the southern hemisphere, but it's over 14 million square kilometers. It's actually twice the size of Australia. So I like just giving the size kind of correlations to see that it's approximately 98% though is covered in ice in Antarctica. So just some fun facts. But to travel to Antarctica, we are going in the Antarctic summer. So it's not as cold as people think it is. So when I went for the first time, it was February. I've also been in November, the beginning of December. So the season is from the beginning of November to the beginning of April, when we actually can travel to Antarctica in the heart of their summer. There is no time that is better than another in those months. It's just different. You're seeing different things at different times. But a lot of people go to Antarctica, and I particularly went not only because it was the 7th continent, but I love mountain ranges. I grew up on the west coast of British Columbia, going to the heart of the Rockies as well when I was younger. So I loved mountain ranges. So a lot of travelers go for the mountains, the wildlife, and also the 7th continent. And there's so much to see and do in the peninsula. That's why I've gone a couple of times, because it's captured my heart. But there's so many things to see and do on the peninsula. Now, when you go to the peninsula, a lot of travelers go to this finger of land between South America and Antarctica because it's the highest concentration of wildlife. And I loved seeing penguins walk around, and over 20 million penguins are in Antarctica, and a lot of them are in this region. Now you're seeing that little squiggly line between South America and Antarctica, and that is called the Antarctic convergence. So it's a convergence of a lot of the oceans coming together. And so that is why this is known as being one of the most roughest bodies of water in the world. Now, if you're like me and get prone to seasickness, I get very seasick, but I still wanted to cross the Drake Passage with the ship. Some people want that badge of honor, that those sailors out there to have that badge of honor of crossing the Drake Passage and sail. But on my sailing to Antarctica, it was one sailing was quite calm, actually. So I was with my Aunt Lucy, and we were having dinner crossing the Antarctic convergence, and a waiter at dinner, we have beer and wine included with dinner, so I had a Malbec that I loved so much, but the server was actually coming around and had a Cabernet Sauvignon. And when he went to pour, I said, no, I don't want a convergence in my wine glass. I want to keep my Malbec separately from the Cabernet Sauvignon. So do not make a convergence in my glass. Let's leave it for the waters between South America and Antarctica. So it can be rough, but we call it either the Drake Lake you can have, or the Drake Shake, where it can be rough. So there are doctors on board, and one crossing on the way back, I did get some seasickness medication from our doctor, but it is all part of the adventure. So when you're thinking of expedition, that is sometimes part of the expedition, even though there's luxurious accommodations on board. But my commonly asked question is, what can I see and do in Antarctica? When I called my mom to tell her that I was going to Antarctica and asked her if she wanted to come with me, she was like, "Who would want to go to Antarctica? What can you see and do there?" But that is when my aunt overheard the conversation and said, "Well, if you're not going, I will go with my niece." So my aunt and I ventured off to Antarctica, but people can see and do the penguins. They are the stars of the show. So people can walk around amongst the penguins, and I loved this part about my trip. There's over 17 species of penguins, and a lot of them are actually in Antarctica. So walking among the penguins, they're so curious. So when I was on a landing, there were penguins everywhere, and you just stand there, and there are regulations of how far you need to stay away from the penguin, but they're so curious, they just come up to you. So I was looking at a gorgeous glacier, and I had feet, my feet about shoulder width apart, and the penguin just came right in between my legs and then looked right up at me and then kept going. And it was one of the most magical experiences, just having these penguins walk around. They definitely are the draw of the show. They're not only Adelie penguins, but also Gen 2s and chin straps. So these little guys that are on the left screen, they have the little strap. It's like they're holding a hat on their head. So those are called the chin strap penguins. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a penguinologist that travels with us to Antarctica. So I loved getting to know a lot more about penguins and their breeding cycles and how they live in Antarctica. So we're going to see rookeries, and in November and early December, the penguins, the adults, are actually making nests to have their eggs in and sit on their eggs. But it's neat because the adults start to steal rocks from each other's nests, and it's quite funny to sit back and see these adult penguins stealing rocks and pebbles to build their own nests. And some of the penguins don't know that their nest is having a burglar come in and steal some rocks. So it's neat to see them witness the fact that their rocks are depleting from their own nests. So they're quite characters, these penguins. But I loved seeing whales. Generally, there's 2 excursions a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And on one morning Zodiac cruise, we were supposed to go on a landing and land on the continent and walk around. But I actually had a mother humpback whale and her calf underneath our Zodiac. So we were in this cove for quite a while. It felt like about 2.5 hours in this cove in the Zodiac. So luckily we were bundled up with our great parkas to keep warm, and we were in a bay with a humpback whale and her calf. There's also 5 species of orca whales that are in Antarctica all year round. And then there's also minke whales. But generally February and March is when a lot of the whales have migrated down to Antarctica for the Antarctic summer to gather krill and feed in the Antarctic summer. But glaciers are made up of fallen snow that are over many years comprised and compressed into large, thick ice masses. And I never get sick of seeing glaciers. They are just so beautiful. And these glaciers are like very, very slow rivers. And I loved learning that from our glaciologist on board, because I wasn't really into ice before, but I loved looking at it. But it was neat to have the glaciologist in my Zodiac one time to share a little bit about not only glaciers, but icebergs. They're so beautiful. And icebergs of every imaginable size. So whether or not I was witnessing from the platform of the ship, because even the ship and being on the vessel itself is one of the best places to view wildlife and scenery. So I love the fact that there are no 2 icebergs that are alike. So it's neat that it's like a piece of art you'll never see again when you're traveling around. So icebergs, only 10% of what you see is above water with icebergs. So there's some more fun facts. And just the ice is so beautiful. I just really love the ice. I fell in love with it. What's neat about these small little pieces too of the icebergs is our Zodiac driver stopped the engine, and we were all quiet in the Zodiac. And our expedition team member said, "Can you listen and hear the iceberg?" And it was a snap, crackle, and pop sound that the iceberg was making. So it kind of reminded me of Rice Krispie Squares cereal, the Rice Krispie snap, crackle, pop sound in my bowl of cereal. which was nostalgic because I haven't had that since I've been a kid. So the Antarctic Peninsula is a wonderful place to go. And just again, to give you an example of maps, because I do love maps, is the peninsula is where it is in relation to the peninsula. And this is where you can actually cross the Antarctic Drake Passage to go to Antarctica. And so typically it takes 11 and 12 days for a great trip where you can explore the peninsula for about 5 or 6 days. But if you do get really seasick, we can fly the Drake Passage, which leaves from Punta Arenas, Chile, and we have a great jet, a very safe jet. And I loved this plane because it's actually painted like a penguin to fly over the Drake Passage, and then it lands in Antarctica and have a full Antarctic experience and fly back. And for people that may have been on an African safari, and of course, like Kenya and certain areas of the Masai Mara, some people want to have 4 or 5 days in the Masai Mara, but some people want to have more. So of course, there are trips that are longer for explorers who are there anyway, and they want to stay longer. So we do have 14-day trips where people can cross right into that Antarctic Circle, 66 degrees south. And again, that checklister, maybe you've gone to the Arctic Circle and have driven up to the Arctic, and you want to have that badge of saying you've crossed the Antarctic Circle as well in the south. And then of course there's the Fly Cruise program that crosses into the Antarctic Circle as well, but you can skip the Drake and fly over. So I love looking at maps because with Punta Arenas, that flight from Punta Arenas, Chile down to Antarctica is about 3.5-hour flight on a jet. But crossing the Drake Passage sailing from Ushuaia takes about 1.5 to 2 days in each direction of sailing. So it just gives you an example of how far approximately Antarctica actually is from South America. But I can't talk about Antarctica without talking about the subantarctic regions, the Falklands and South Georgia. And so these areas are not on a lot of people's radar, but become on their radar when you learn about them because there's so much wildlife and history in these regions. So they are subantarctic areas, and South Georgia is home to over 200,000 king penguins. Just gorgeous. So the wildlife is incredible. And the king penguin is actually a species of bird that you can't see in Antarctica. So that's why a lot of travelers have South Georgia on their radar, because it's a wonderful place to see the king penguin. So this is the second largest penguin species. And it does look a lot like the emperor penguin, the tallest penguin species. So it does get confused sometimes with the emperor penguin, but the king penguin is almost as tall, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous penguin. But you might notice the brown penguins in that picture, if you could notice that, the brown penguins, and they're actually juvenile penguins. So they are still king penguins, but they're just the chicks. So they're molting their feathers. So they're world-class divers, these juvenile penguins, and they can stay underwater for up to 10 minutes. So they're probably fishing, but they can stay under for 10 minutes. So this is a neat way to see the juvenile birds as well. I don't talk about the scenery enough in the regions in which we travel to, but the scenery in South Georgia is spectacular. And I think when people think of Antarctica or even the subantarctic regions, they think cold, and it's not as cold. So in Antarctica, the average temperatures are about 5 degrees Celsius to -5. And then in the subantarctic regions, it can be about +7 even in these regions in South Georgia. So there were times where I had my parka and I wrapped it around my waist and I just had a long sleeve fleece shirt on, walking around and hiking. And if you're an active traveler, hiking in South Georgia is phenomenal, just like Antarctica. So the scenery in the mountain ranges are just beautiful. So you can see all the lush green grass in the subantarctic regions. South Georgia is known as the subantarctic Galapagos, known as the Galapagos of the subantarctic region. So again, with proximity, South Georgia to Antarctica, there are voyages that can happen with South Georgia and Antarctica for 16 days. So going from Ushuaia, Argentina, on your way to South Georgia before going to Antarctica. And the Falkland Islands are are seen on your way to South Georgia. And there's a lot of history, but they're gorgeous. The Falkland Islands are just beautiful. So you can travel there for a couple days on the vessel. And it's great having the ship, a small ship under 200 passengers, because everyone can get off and explore these regions and go into Stanley and areas like Gypsy Cove, this gorgeous beach. And because it's under 200 passengers, everyone's able to get off at the same time. And I know some travelers can go and explore Falkland Islands on their own, but it does take some planning, and there might only be one flight for every 7 or 10 days going into these areas of Falklands. So with the ship, it's neat to be able to go for a few days and then continue on and travel somewhere else. But the Falkland Islands are home to the rockhopper penguin. I love this funny hairdo that the rockhoppers have. And so it's really neat that our penguinologist was able to explain a lot of the differences of penguin species, because these islands are home to 5 breeding penguins. So not only the Gentoo, the king, rockhopper, but also the macaroni and Magellanic penguins. So these areas of subantarctic are gorgeous, but in the Falkland Islands, the albatross, if you're a birder, the albatross is in the Falkland Islands, and you can see nesting albatrosses. So this is where they're nesting. So they're usually out at sea, and they have the largest wingspan of any living bird. And I was never a birder until I started traveling with Quark Expeditions. And I love now that after spending time with our ornithologist, I now have my own binoculars, and I'm in High Park looking at the species of birds there now, even when I go for my walks. But the albatross is a gorgeous bird, and that people can see them in the Falklands. You might be able to get a glimpse of it, of an albatross sailing over the Drake Passage, because they are out at sea so much. Sometimes they go counterclockwise around the vessel, catching the draft of the ship. So I didn't see one personally on my crossings, but it is possible. And so again, with a map, the Falklands, South Georgia, and Antarctica is a great place to explore, making trips a little bit longer, about 20 days. So November is a great time to do this. So next year or the year after, but also the whole kit and caboodle is the epic Antarctic trip, where you can go to the Falklands, South Georgia, and cross the Antarctic Circle. So it's our most in-depth exploration of this region, and a great for explorers. And a lot of people only go once, so this is the whole kit and caboodle. Some people go to Antarctica once and then come back to do the Falklands and South Georgia and experience Antarctica again. Patagonia is so beautiful, and as I love mountain ranges, I loved going to Ushuaia and exploring a bit of Patagonia before I got on the ship to go to Antarctica. So I did some small hikes, but Patagonia is neat because it goes not only into the area of Argentina, but also borders Chile. So it's in Chile as well as Argentina. And so it encompasses the vast southernmost tip of South America. But I love also the wildlife in Patagonia, but I didn't spend enough time there. So I need to go back, because a couple of days was not enough. And because it comprises the southern section of the Andes Mountains and lakes and fjords, we actually have trips now that go there on the end of the Antarctic trip. So it extends the trip a couple of days, so sometimes 13 days, but it's for an opportunity to go into areas, UNESCO heritage sites, and Diego Ramirez Islands, which I haven't explored yet, and Cape Horn. So especially the sailors love rounding Cape Horn or landing on Cape Horn. So there are opportunities to explore more of Patagonia as well. What separates Quark Expeditions, though, from a lot of adventure companies, and a lot of what's included the trip, are fantastic opportunities to get off the ship as much as possible. Because even though I was on a small ship, I love the fact that it can appeal to cruisers. So my aunt loves being on cruise ships, but I also love the active component. So it can be as active or as leisure as you want your trip to be. And so what's included is always the Zodiac cruising, the hiking, the infamous polar plunge. I love jumping in the polar waters, so it's optional adventure option, and photography programs on all of the trips. So my aunt's a photographer, so she went with the photographer group a lot, or went to that lecture on board, whereas sometimes I wouldn't go in the photography zodiac with her. I would go on a longer hike, but then we could meet up at lunch or dinner and chat about it, and then jump in a zodiac together or do a contemplative walk. So it can really appeal to a lot of different activity levels, but so much is included with the trip. But there's also additional adventure options, so like camping. So on the top right there, this is a bivy bag, bivouac sack to camp on the continent of Antarctica. I actually helped an advisor book someone's 25th wedding anniversary. So they had their 25th wedding anniversary on the Antarctic continent camping. So that was quite adventurous. But then we also have things like stand-up paddleboarding. And one of our stand-up paddleboarding guides, when I was chatting with him, said that over 70% of the people that stand-up paddleboard with him in Antarctica have never stand-up paddleboarded before. And so they experienced it in Antarctica. So that is definitely adventurous. And of course, we supply wetsuits and things like that, and the stand-up paddleboards and the personal flotation devices. But we also have kayaking. So lots of different kayaking programs. I know even paddling in the Toronto Harbor here or other areas of Southern Ontario, Algonquin's so beautiful to kayak. Why not kayak in the polar region? So we do have designated kayaking excursions where people can actually have their own sea kayaks. Or if someone just wants to do it for one time, we have the inflatable kayaks. I loved paddling around Antarctica and also the Arctic in an inflatable kayak, which was very stable because I'm not an experienced kayaker. But I loved paddling around the icebergs and getting a different perspective. I even saw a seal on an iceberg while I was paddling in the inflatable kayaks, and small groups of 10 and 12 people go out in the adventure option. So very intimate settings, getting out in the heart of nature. So I loved doing those types of adventure options. So as I mentioned before, there's stand-up paddleboarding, but also mountaineering in Antarctica. Great opportunity to climb. And I love the fact that these are small groups. And if people are traveling together or intergenerational families, I love that the 16 or 18-year-olds can do the mountain climbing, or the parents that want to do mountain climbing, but maybe the kids want to do kayaking. So it's a great opportunity for people to do different activities, but still travel together for families. Cross-country skiing. I cross-country skied in Montebello Park a couple of years ago and loved it, but we do have it in Antarctica as well. So just intermediate and beginner cross-country skiing options just to add to the fun in Antarctica. So there are designated departures that you can ask your Expedia Cruises specialist about if you're inquiring about that. Before I get to one of our new vessels that has 2 helicopters on it, we do have new adventure options in both the Arctic for next season and continuing Antarctica for next year. With helicopters, heli sightseeing is included now. And I loved, Steve mentioned that I was on the 50 Years of Victory getting engaged, and what was so neat on that vessel is there was a helicopter on that ship with Quark Expeditions. So I love the aerial views that you can get of the glaciers. So even though maybe you've cruised Alaska and you've seen the glaciers from the ship, or maybe you did the helicopters and you could see the glaciers above with an Alaska cruise. And that's what I love about Antarctica with the helicopters, is you not only get the going in the zodiacs and maneuvering around the ice flows and going up and seeing the glaciers from the sea level, but I love getting that different perspective of being in a helicopter for even 15, 20 minutes and seeing different perspectives of the ice. And there are heli landings and heli excursions that people can do, and heli hiking with the helicopters. But I love our expedition team. We have a small ratio of 1 expedition team member to 7 passengers. So I loved having the expedition team sitting with me during dinners and lunches, and my aunt telling stories and sharing things of their research that they've done, or experiences maybe when they lived in in Greenland doing research on the glaciers. I had a fellow, Michael Hambury, who won 2 medals from the Queen of England for his research on glaciers. He did research in Antarctica as well as Greenland. So he said that it was wonderful meeting the Queen once and in Buckingham Palace. But then he said she was so lovely because she switched it to Windsor Castle so he could receive his second medal from the Queen of England. So it was neat hearing stories like that from our expedition team. And they're not only sitting with everyone during dinners and lunches and giving fantastic educational programs. I love the fact that they're the people driving our Zodiacs too. We have a level of safety with the Quark Academy program that is second to none. And I love how experienced our Zodiac drivers are. So they're not actually our ship crew members that will be driving you in Zodiacs in these little rubber safe boats. They're actually our expedition team members. So that is something that's very special, and they're very passionate about the polar regions and what they do. So they're excited to share everything on a landing with you or even out on deck. So we are traveling on small ships, and I loved being on little vessels. And small expedition ships are really important because I love getting off the ship as much as possible. So all of our ships are under 200 passengers so that we can get off as much as possible. Weather dependent, of course, it is a true expedition in that sense. But the small expedition ships, as soon as people are looking at ships that are 250, 300 passengers, that does impact excursions and landings because not everyone can get off the ship at the same time. I loved everyone being able to get off the ship, but with the larger vessels of 250, 300, 500 passengers, you've got groups A, B, C, and D. Maybe group A is out and they're seeing the whales. You're on a group maybe B, C, and D, and you're stuck on board. And then when group A comes back, maybe the weather turns or the wildlife has left. So with small expedition ships, it's really important because everyone's able to get off and do different activities. So a question in the panel and online I just see here is that some people are talking about health and safety protocols, and that is very important during this, especially the time in which we face. So we do have 4 pillars of health and safety. So it's a really great question. I'm glad someone brought it up privately in the chat because traveling on small ships, we have always been experts in clean ships, and we were traveling in March during the beginning of the pandemic with in Antarctica with everything going on. And health and safety is first and foremost with the cleanliness of our ships, cleanliness of our crew, cleanliness, of course, of our passengers and keeping our passengers safe. And so we do have our 4 pillars of safety, which absolutely can be shared. So that's a really great point. And health and safety, not only with our Quark Academy, with training our expedition team, but also our crew and our passengers. So I'm glad that was brought up with the small ships. It's really important. And what I love too about Zodiacs is they're open air. So it's wonderful that everyone's out off the ship as much as possible and out on deck. So this is our new game-changing ship, the Ultramarine. She's currently being built in Croatia. We'll have her starting sailing with us in the Arctic in Spitsbergen in May of next year, which is very exciting. And this expedition ship is really purpose-built and second to none. She has 2 helicopter pads, 20 quick launching Zodiacs, so we can get off the ship even faster. And with the 2 helicopters, we can go further and farther and really go beyond with this expedition vessel. You'll also see at the stern of the ship, there's 4 Zodiac disembarkation points. Our average age is 50 on our trips. And so I loved with my 66-year-old aunt that she was able to easily get in and out of the Zodiac. So we do have expedition team members doing Zodiac with grips, with emergency grips, sailors grips to get in and out at all ages. So I love if you can get into a bathtub. It's there's help getting into the in out of the Zodiacs. Which is great. So the Zodiac deployment on the Ultramarine is going to be even faster. We've got spas on board, all outside cabins, which is wonderful. They're just beautiful, spacious cabins. We even have balconies and cabins without balconies. So all outside ships. And a lot of people want to go on these trips on their own. Maybe they can't find someone to go with them. So if you are one of those types of travelers that do really want to go, we do have solo cabins as well. And you can find like-minded individuals to travel with. So we have lots of different ships in our fleet. I will definitely let your Expedia Cruises counselor go through those with you and your specialist. The World Explorer is also another luxurious ship we have in our fleet, only 176 passengers, again under 200 passengers. A great vessel to explore the polar regions with. And our Ocean Adventure is only 132 passengers. She is one of the most popular ships in our fleet because she did win a small ship cruising award, and she also had a multi-million-dollar renovation a couple of years ago with us. So we've had her in our fleet for a couple of years. I love traveling with her to the Arctic. I haven't been with her on Antarctica yet, but there's some great vessels in our fleet, like the Ocean Diamond as well, going to Antarctica, 189 passengers. But a lot of people ask, well, what's the on-ship experience like? And so with these types of trips, I loved getting off the ship as much as possible, but there's so much to do on board with not only chef prepared meals, we have a polar library. So I love being in Antarctica and then learning a little bit more about Shackleton and Shackleton's endurance and flipping through a book on Ernest Shackleton. And then we also have the educational programs on board with our expedition team giving fantastic presentations. We also have fun themed events and quiz nights in the pub. We also have a spa on board, so you can also have your polar plunge or have a wonderful landing and come back to a spa treatment. So there's lots of things to do on board in addition to wonderful food. And everyone's seated at the same time in the dining room, so it is plated meals on board and snacks throughout the trip. We also have beer and wine with dinner. And there are exercise facilities on our ships, especially like the Ultramarine. We have great gyms because some people are going on these trips, and I had someone that was wanting to still train for a marathon, so they were able to still use the gym equipment and things like that in the spa. But the lounges and bars, I loved chatting with people and like-minded individuals when I was a passenger on our trips and chatting with people from all over the world. And so the lounges and the bars are a great place to relax, or if you're a photographer, go through your photos in the bars and the lounge areas. But I love our daily recaps. So every day at the end of the day, right before dinner, everyone gets called into the theater and we have a wonderful recap of what was seen that day. And then our expedition leader also shares the adventure of what might happen the following day. So when you hear expedition, it really is truly an adventure because one morning we could have something on the agenda like my landing in Antarctica. We were supposed to go on a landing site, but then it was a true expedition because we ended up not going on the landing that morning and being with that humpback mother and her calf. But the onboard learning, I loved getting called out in the middle of lunch. And we actually had to have the chef keep our meals warm because the expedition leader came on the loudspeaker inside and said, please come out. And there is a whale, a pod actually of orcas on starboard side. And so we were able to get out off the ship, and the expedition team come around and share with people what is being seen. Maybe it's a whale, maybe it's a seal, or maybe it's a penguin. But that's what I love, is the educational component doesn't end even in the presentations and in the Zodiacs, but on board as well. And the ships really are the best viewing platform for wildlife and scenery, as I mentioned. I love connecting with fellow passengers, not only the expedition team members, but the passengers that travel on board. I really do believe it's not only where we are, but it's who we're traveling with that makes a big difference. And I love traveling with all of our passengers and hearing stories about where they've come from. So I know if you travel with us in the future, it's neat to connect with like-minded individuals on board. Well, with health and safety being mentioned and protocols with clean ships and safe ship crew and passengers, I can't talk about safety without talking about our sustainability as well, because sustainability has always been a part of our DNA. And in the spring of 2019, we unveiled our sustainability strategy and our polar promise. So we came out with actually a public report that your Expedia Cruises specialists can share with you, we have reduced our footprint because we do believe in going to these remote locations of the world. We want to reduce our emissions, and also people come back as polar ambassadors. So we do have a polar ambassador program because I believe when people go to these regions and they really are changed when they come back. And I find that people want to come back and feel like what's one thing that they can do to help the environment in which we live in our own communities. So we do have lots of sustainability initiatives. We've eliminated single-use plastics. So even in 2019 alone, we eliminated over 320,000 single-use plastic bottles alone. And we've decreased our emissions by 28% in our fleet since 2010. So with us being in business for almost 30 years, these are things that we're really, really focused on and that are very important to us. So thank you so much for your time today. I love talking about the polar regions, and I get super excited about travel in general. So I love that we're doing this around the world in 22 days. So thank you so much, Expedia Cruises, for having me today. And I love your amazing show that you've got here virtually. And we also have time for questions too, don't forget. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat functionality.
No questions. Anybody have any questions?
And someone did ask if it was being recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. So everyone can get a copy of this sent out to them. Not a problem at all. And someone also asked about the pictures that I was talking about with the pictures. Yeah, so all the places I was talking about, there's some definitely great pictures in there. And please reach out to your Expedia Cruises advisor because they have a lot of these pictures as well. And I can even share some more of my personal pictures. So that's the advantage of working with Expedia Cruises. So please reach out if you have any questions about that. Oh, when will our 2023 voyages be released? Great question. So our Antarctic 22-23 season will actually be released in a few weeks. So in November, so a few weeks time, which is really exciting.
I don't see any other questions. Kara, do you have any more?
Wonderful. No, I don't see any more coming through. So I know there was a lot of information about Antarctica here and shared and stories. So if anyone has any questions after they've been thinking for a while about it, please don't hesitate to reach out to Expedia Cruises at any time.
Great. Well, I would like to thank Kara for this evening. It's been an absolutely awesome presentation. I personally have traveled there, and I know that there's only a very few cruise lines that actually have landing rights on the Antarctic Peninsula, and Quark is definitely one of them. So if you're looking at doing a trip where you will actually get to experience a landing, then this is the type of company you want to travel with. A lot of the others, some of our other cruise lines will just cruise in the area, but this is your real chance to do an expedition, get off the ship, land, walk amongst the penguins and the seals. And let me tell you, they don't smell too pretty, but they're really cute. And what was really great about landing is I actually made up a sign the morning of that we were going to be on the peninsula. And I could have made an absolute fortune because everybody kept asking me for it so that they could get pictures of themselves holding it. So it was really quite a lot of fun. But on behalf of the 3 Expedia Cruises centers, the Mississauga with Rob and Tina and Glenn and their consultants, the Mississauga Central, Nancy and Steve McInnes and Rob and Tina again as well with Rashmi and their consultants, and myself, Lisa and Stephen, we're with Mississauga East, and all of my consultants. We would love to thank all of you for attending this evening and hope that we've given you a little bit of hunger to go and check out the Antarctica. It is absolutely stunning. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you to Kara as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful evening.